What's the best season?
Yeah, I'm asked what the best season is all the time, and what my favorite episode is. And I always say the best season I think was season 3, just because we really hit our stride. But I don't know what the best season is. I know that had the most interesting mix of standalone episodes.
So three is your favorite?
I would say 3 is maybe the best because it had the best comedy episodes and it had some of the best dramatic episodes.
Was it your intention from the beginning of the series to leave some storylines unresolved?
You know, you always say that you know where you're going, but the truth is you find your way there. So we certainly with the mythology episodes, we knew where we wanted to go, or we knew where we wanted to end up, but we didn't know exactly how we were going to get there. So it was I likened it to Lewis and Clark. They knew where they were going, but they didn't know what they'd experience along the way.
What you want to talk about the threads of mythology?
Yeah. What about them in particular?
Why did you want to make a documentary about the series?
Do you mean what do you mean a documentary about the series?
The threads of mythology. What prompted you to make a documentary about that?
You know, the X-Files had gained such a big fan base, and we had developed such an elaborate and complex mythology that I think that what you want to do is you wanted to explain to people, you know, what that mythology was. I noticed that Lost, in their final episode, actually, they had the producers on camera before the show explaining what the threads of the mythology were.
There was a demand for it.
Yeah, there's a demand for it.
What, in your opinion, is the legacy of the show?
You know, I don't know what the legacy of the show is. I think that's for others to say. I hope that we had an impact on the quality of television. I hope that, you know, if people talk about there was a golden age of television in the 90s, that we were a part of it. You know, I don't know what its ultimate influence will be, but I just hope it plays forever.
And just one thing I'm curious about, how did you come up with the title?
The X-Files?
Of the show, yeah.
You know, X is the symbol for the unknown, and so X-Files felt right that these files would have an X as a prefix.
Were any other titles considered?
No. No other titles were considered. It was the X-Files from the beginning.
Let's talk about the recent feature. What was the premise of I Want to Believe?
The premise of I Want to Believe is it's really a standalone episode. It's while the first movie was a mythology episode, this was an episode that didn't depend on one's knowledge of the mythology, and that was for 2 reasons. One is that we were going to be given a limited budget to work with, so we wanted to do something that didn't involve special effects or spaceships or aliens or that part of the mythology. And 2, it had been 7 years at that point since the show had been on the air, so we didn't want to burden people with having to know that aspect of the show. So those were things that fueled or inspired us to do this episode, which is about a psychic who is perhaps channeling a serial murder.
What was it like revisiting that world after being away from it for 5 years?
It was very strange to write Mulder and Scully in the script, in the dialogue, and actually be writing for them one more time. It was something that I didn't know that I would ever do again.
Did the final film meet your expectations?
You know, it was what we set out to do, and it's funny that after 7 years, I think some of the valid criticism of it was that we had done what could be considered an episode of the television series, and while we always said we set out to do a little movie each week with the X-Files, we were given the money to do a little movie, and that's what we did.
Do you think people were sort of looking for something else from the movie, like more closure, or?
Because we were a summer movie, I think they were looking for something that was a little bit more larger in scale and scope.
Do you think that fans might be frustrated with the relationship between Mulder and Scully because it kind of doesn't really have a label on it like marriage or...
I never thought of that. It is still an intense relationship, and played that way from beginning to end. And their disagreements were as great as their agreements.
But what makes it interesting, I guess, is that it can't really be pinned down. This is exactly what it is.
It's an unconventional relationship. I think from the beginning to the end, and. Even in putting them together in the last movie, it was still a very chaste relationship at that point.
Do you think there will be another X-Files film?
There's a possibility there would be a third X-Files movie. We'll know that before long.
Let's talk about Millennium. What was the premise of the show?
Yeah, I was asked to do a second series while the X-Files was in production, and I had gone to Seattle to do research on what I thought was going to be one thing, but ended up being another. And it was fueled by the interest in the coming turn of the century. And I felt that there was a fear that was building in society that Y2K was sort of coming into the familiar lexicon. And I felt that there was something brewing. And little did I know what was brewing in the bigger sense. But I wanted to do a show about a guy who had a facility, if you will, to look into the minds of killers and to wed that with the sort of coming millennial malaise.
How was it working on two shows simultaneously?
I remember doing the fourth season of The X-Files and the first season of Millennium, and then getting ready to do the movie. It was way too much work. I think there were about 1,000 people working on 1013 productions at that point. It was, I don't know how we ever did it.
How was it different working on the two shows? What were the differences in the experience?
The experiences were very different. The shows were very different. One show was about the paranormal and it was really considered a science fiction show, where Millennium was much more about earthly villains and real killers. The actor Lance Henriksen works in a very different way than the actors on the X-Files, and that was an experience for me too.
How did you come to cast Lance Henriksen?
You know, he was somebody that I loved. I loved his work, and I actually wrote it with him in mind, and ended up getting it to him, and it was just a stroke of luck that we actually got him.
How was he different from the two X-Files leads?
I think David, in particular, is a much more has a more cerebral approach to the process, and Lance has a much more, I'd call it, gut approach and instinctual approach to the process. So I remember saying to Lance, "You can't use your hands. I want your face and your voice. I don't want you to be a salesman in any way. And using your hands tends to be a way actors sell their performance. And so that was something that I took out of his bag of tricks."
What was the greater goal or purpose of Millennium? I know that at some point you had expressed that you wanted it to do more than entertain. What was the more that you wanted?
Well, I wanted it to be a scary show, but I wanted it to be a thought-provoking show as well, and that's why we began the original episodes with a quote. We wanted it to make the audience think, and actually do it in I would call it a sort of literate way.
Do you have a favorite episode?
I think that pilot stands out for me as really one of the best things I've done, and it's scary. It's beautifully directed by David Nutter.
How did you feel about the viewer response to the series?
The original and initial response was great. We got big ratings. I mean, in today's terms, the ratings were astronomical. But the show sort of being on Friday nights at 9 o'clock, it took on that sort of cult audience once again. And while even when the show ended, our ratings would be considered great by today's standards. We actually kicked ourselves off the air, I think, after 3 years by producing a television show called Harsh Realm, which ended up taking its place on Friday nights at 9.
So it was basically your choice to end Millennium and do the other show.
It was a mutual decision.
Okay. Let's talk about the Lone Gunman for a second. Why did you decide to spin off those characters?
You know, it really was the writers Frank Spotnitz, Vince Gilligan, and John Scheiben who wanted to do that spinoff, and you know, I blessed it. But I think it's really it's some of the best work that all of us have done. It really, I think, was I don't know if it was ahead of its time, but it was certainly one of the best shows, I think, you know, that we did.
How was it different from the X-Files?
It was almost all comedy based, and using those, I would call them offbeat nerds.
When I told people that I was going to be talking to you today, in addition to the many X-Files questions that people gave to me to ask you, they brought up the 9/11 connection in The Lone Gunman. Do you want to talk about that or comment on it?
I'll comment on it, but it was totally coincidental that we actually had an airplane that nearly collides with the World Trade Center in the Lone Gunman pilot. It's something that had been talked about before, so when people say it was the unimaginable, it wasn't. It had been imagined. That those buildings had actually been constructed with the idea that they might be hit by an aircraft. So just so happens that it was also in our original pilot.
So the importance of it would be when a government official says this was not something that was foreseeable.
Yeah.
It was by television writers.
Well, by television writers, among others.
Right. Why do you think it only lasted 13 episodes, given the huge following the X-Files had?
Yeah. It was a show that while it had 3 characters from the X-Files, it wasn't like the X-Files. It was different from the X-Files, and I think that made the network and the studio uneasy. And I know they never promoted the show really, and didn't know what it was and didn't know what they had. But I think now, looking back at that series, it could have lasted a good long time.
Talk about Harsh Realm a little bit?
Yeah. Harsh Realm was an idea that was brought to me by Dan Sackheim and the producer Tony To, and they originally wanted to do it sort of in the vein of Dick Tracy, and much more comic book style, but I came up with a different spin on it, and that was also a short-lived 1013 production show.
By the way, why is your production company 1013?
1013 Productions is it's my birth date, October 13th, and it's always been 2 lucky numbers for me.
Easy enough. Do you think Harsh Realm might be different if it premiered now?
I think it's funny, we talked about going back and perhaps revisiting the idea because it's an Avatar idea, and maybe it was ahead of its time in that way. Certainly looking at the success of the movie Avatar, you know, it suggests that.
Let's just sum up a little bit. What changes do you see in the future of television?
Well, I took a break from television because I felt it was being dominated by reality shows, and it wasn't a great time to produce, you know, 1-hour dramas.
It was more difficult to get things because there's less real estate.
There's less real estate, but also the shows that were on were less interesting to me. And then all of a sudden you have a show like Lost, or you have a show like 24, and you see these shows succeeding in that environment. So it's actually sort of excited me again.
What has changed since you started working in television?
I think what has changed are the budgets have changed. We began with a budget of about $1.1 million an episode on the X-Files. I think a TV show now, sort of the standard budget, runs upward of $3 million or high twos. So there's a lot more money being spent on dramatic television.
How has becoming famous changed your life?
It's funny, I don't think of myself as famous per se, and that I actually gained any notoriety or at all is a fluke, because I think that television producers don't, unless you get, unless you're like Stephen Bochco, where you've had shows that have spanned a certain amount of time, a breadth of good work.
But you transcended that. People know your name.
I think that's true, but I think it's based on the good work that the X-Files was.
Are you currently working on any project?
Yes, I'm actually working on something that involves a conspiracy.
And it's a TV show?
It's not. It's actually a movie.
It's a feature?
Mm-hmm.
What is your proudest achievement in your career?
Well, I have to say the X-Files is I'm proudest of, first of all, because I think it was good work from beginning to end, and second of all, that we actually kept that standard through 9 seasons.
So keeping the standard up was...
Yes.
Yeah. Any regrets?
I'm sure that I have regrets, but I can't catalog them right now.
What advice would you give to aspiring television writers?
Make sure that you've got a story and a pilot and an idea that from the beginning could be it could spawn 100 episodes. You must have that. If you don't have that, then you're going to be winging it. And there aren't a lot of really good television ideas, so you have to, while you think you may have a good idea, it has to be that chicken that lays the golden eggs week after week.
What advice would you give to aspiring television producers?
Don't accept imposed limitations. Always push the limits.
And how do you want to be remembered?
I don't know. I'm sure I'll be remembered as the creator of the X-Files. Hopefully there's something beyond that.
Thank you very much, Chris.
You're welcome. Thanks.